Hello and welcome to the podcast where we explore game design and all its elements, in particular the game economy. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Monika Monko. Monika, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hey, happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm currently working as a design project manager at the Kraft Heinz company. But I have a very diverse background, actually. It's a mix of design and media. I studied graphic design, so in a very traditional sense of it as well. Yeah, English as well happened along the way. I got into UX design at some point, into packaging design. So a lot of different things. I also really enjoy illustration, typesetting, anything that has to do with like visual stuff, anything that you can make with your hands, so on and so forth. Analog photography, lots of things. But yeah.
No, that sounds great. And this is the reason why I was keen to talk to you is because as well as all that, you're a Woman in Game ambassador. But I think what I thought was particularly refreshing for me is that I want to get under the bones of what design is. Now, I mean, the term design has a broad range of topics. You've covered a bunch of them already. You talked about the kind of communication elements, the UX, functional design. So I want to get to the little underneath and try and work out, is there a distinction in what a game design function is? Are there comparisons? Are there parallels? Are there processes that apply across all aspects of the craft, art, science, whatever that is, of what design is? So that's a long-winded way of me saying, to you, what does design mean?
In the simplest way I can think of it, it's when things that are made to fulfill some purpose, do that exactly without obstructions. So it starts with really simple stuff we use on a daily basis. It's phones, laptops, but it's even coffee machines, right? It's even like doorknobs when you think about it. It's anything can be designed, and essentially you need to do things, you have tasks, and you just need that thing to get you there. That's it. Simple as that. Then you get into design. It's very different when you're talking about, I think, design in video games or UX design as a broad term, or even design, how I deal with it on a daily basis. So in my company, for example, it falls very much under the umbrella of marketing activities. And then the design part is essentially mostly visual assets being made by certain agencies, and those assets being translated, say, into packaging that ends up on shelf, right? Of course, it has to be functional, not just pretty. There's way more involved than just like it looks a certain way, it's eye-catching and so on and so forth. But that's I think there's a big distinction between essentially this just visual design that a lot of people think is design, and then this functional design, which is just all around us.
I think that's exactly it. I think the functional part of the it's a cliche. I've forgotten who said it originally, but the form follows function is such a kind of pivotal facet of what we're trying to talk about here. But what I really liked about what you were saying there is the idea that yes, it has to perform its function, but its function feels to me like it's more than just holding that, I don't know, that mayonnaise, or holding that corner of a building up. It's got additional elements and layers in terms of our consumption, of our engagement, of the role it plays in our aesthetic circumstances, for want of a better phrase. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I literally just thought immediately of the plastic ketchup bottle where we used to have glass bottles that were a bit tricky, or glass jars for mayonnaise, for ketchup, for any condiments, right?
Yeah.
And we know that it's sometimes tricky to just get like that ketchup or whatever is in there to get it out of there. So the glass is...
Well, particularly, you got to hit it at the right marker, which had the Heinz symbol, and
So that's already a design decision that was made, which was, okay, this is tricky and people are struggling with it. We need to make something, we need to do something about it. But it's basically what you said. It just goes beyond this function of like, this is a container to hold something in it and it's just pretty. And we moved into bottles that we can squeeze easily. And then they're also like no leakage, no dripping and so on. And then you see this example of like kids actually love this because it's so easy for them to squeeze out ketchup on their food.
Yeah.
So this is already like, this is good design because it is functional, but it's also like, it doesn't obstruct anything and it also looks good. It's also recognizable.
And I think Heinz was the first team that created the upside down bottle, if I remember correctly. And That itself to me is a masterpiece of an example of how we have a functional problem in the delivery that was actually more aesthetically pleasing, and also had to solve a whole bunch of technical innovation simultaneously. Because the idea of having a thing that semi-liquid objects come out of that doesn't leak. I mean, you kind of hinted that already, but doesn't it? I think is a massive logistical challenge, particularly because you've got to be able to produce it at scale.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the functionality that maybe some people don't appreciate about the effort that goes into design. Is that looking good is fine, functioning is fine, it's all of which is essential, but repeatability. It strikes me that's a key facet. I mean, how much? I mean, when you are. I mean, again, I'm not going to ask you for specifics, but if you're approaching a design challenge, like a new packaged delivery bottle of some sort, or whatever it might be, what are kind of the function? What's the not function? What are the fundamental questions you're asking before you get started and diving into that design problem?
I'll take food products as a general example because I wanted to touch upon how a lot of people view design and how things are actually designed. So to a lot who are just consumers who don't really know what goes into it, they go into a store, they see stuff on a shelf, and that's it. Like they make their decisions based on labels. They don't realize there's a whole process behind it, which involves experimenting, testing, reworking, then testing again, and giving prototypes, right? Making, you see the same thing even with websites, right? You make wireframes, you make prototypes. You don't make a thing immediately that's like a finished product. No, you just have to get there. So you start building, and you're not just making drawings on paper, you're building things. So it's a lot of and this even goes for, it's not just packaging. Like my area is still mostly packaging. But even for the products that go inside of this packaging, everything has to be tested. It's previously I was involved with ice cream, and there were samples delivered from the R&D department that would just come in like these little boxes with just a simple label written in someone would write in pen, this is this variant, so on and so forth. And we were testing if it tastes okay, if it's going to sell, if the balance of flavors is right. So you make this time and time again. And every iteration brings something new, and it is supposed to, in the end, it's supposed to solve some problem. So it's a lot of things that are make up the final product and the big picture.
Yeah, and for me, it's a case of that. You've got a whole bunch of questions there. You've got to think about the audience that this is targeted at. You've got to think about the lifestyle function of the item. Where does it fit into their daily routine or whatever else? The attractiveness off the shelf, like you described already. I mean, these seems to be. Are these just things that or again, is there a degree of data and research analysis, or is it all just a case of we put an experiment together, we test it? How do you approach that whole preparation stage?
I would say I know some things because I've been in fast-moving consumer goods for quite some years now. So it's just it makes sense to me. It's in my head. There is always a researcher involved, and I really feel like if you don't do research, you are essentially validating your own. You're not even validating. You're just working out your own assumptions. For a lot of designers, this is a problem, right? They make assumptions. Just say they think, okay, well, I'm making a product that will solve this particular problem without actually. This is a problem for them. This is not a problem for users, consumers, so on and so forth. And then they get to a stage where they start talking to someone else, and then the person mentions a completely different issue that they have in their daily usage of a given product. And then for the designer, it's like, oh yeah, actually, I probably am not focusing on the right thing. So it very much starts with a good problem definition. This is something I think everyone has to learn, really, if they want to get into proper design, where we tend to look for solutions immediately, but we don't really spend time establishing the problems that we're trying to solve. So this is something I'm still working on, honestly. Sometimes I really have to take a step back and think, okay, this is what I've seen is an issue. This is what my users have been complaining about. But is this really the problem? Are we solving the right problem, right?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think that problem identification of what the actual problem is in games slightly more complicated in some
Mm,
ways, because what we're trying to create is something they don't yet know is possible. And not in
yeah.
every case. I mean, match 3 game is a match 3 game is a match 3 game. It's fine. But the way that our match 3 game operates and why that is going to be attractive is such a subjective set of
Mm-hmm.
functions. But then I guess the particular, alternative flavor of ice cream or the particular alternative flavor of a particular kind of, barbecue sauce or whatever else it might be, again, is going to have a subjective component. But from the design perspective, you've got other constraints. And I think yes, you do your research and you understand the requirement to fulfill, but it strikes me that you've also got a bunch of external constraints. For
Mm,
example, shelf space. For example, the volume of items,
mm-hmm.
the size of the packaging that can be fitted in. And I arguably, a lot of people won't realize this, but shelf space in supermarkets in particular is such a premium that you're
Mm-hmm.
basically having to replace something else
Yep.
in order to get that location. So how do those constraints affect the way that you approach the fulfilling the problem? Does it just simply make it more complicated, or does it actually provide you with a framework to help you get to a solution?
I think it makes the work a bit more complicated at an early stage because ideally you think about it from early on. So what I see a lot, something I'm really trying to drive towards better solutions and more really like an end-to-end process is when you are starting brainstorming, say on a new product, you really have to think about how it's going to taste, how it's going to look, where it's going to fit, everything you mentioned, everything I've mentioned before. Not just I identified this gap in the market and we need to make this, because this always results in problems along the line, honestly. Like I've never seen a process that would just go easily because everything was covered from square one. It's never like this. What I run into very often, honestly, is we have a great visual design, something that looks absolutely amazing on the computer screens when we're looking at it, but no one actually thought about how this translates to packaging. We end up with something where consumers pick it up and think, yeah, this is decent, but it's not mind-blowing like we intended it to be, because really no one considered the packaging aspect of it and what's feasible, what's not feasible. It's the same with shelf space. It's the same with what formats, what areas, where we want to go with this. If it's going to, this is going to be an extreme example, but basically, again, when I worked on ice cream and we were working on a new range of out-of-home products and COVID hit, there wasn't any out-of-home products essentially, right? Yeah. Suddenly we're not selling. So where are we supposed to move? Like, what are we going to do? Like, people still want to eat ice cream, but they're at home. They're stuck.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's things you can plan for. There's things that right now it's a bit better, fortunately, but there's always things that you need to try to keep in mind, honestly.
It's the unknown unknowns, as Donald
Yeah.
Rumsfeld famously once said, and was ridiculed for, probably rightly, but that's for a different subject. But I think this whole thing really kind of resonates with me because, like you say, the risk factors that are involved in the process seem to me, particularly in your world, well, actually, to be honest, in both worlds, they're quite extreme because the amount of functional work in order to produce a prototype, that prototype then needs to be translated into something which can be mass produced. And only really when it hits scale do you know if that resonates with an audience. Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, I was just thinking about video games specifically where you have recently, maybe not recently, but over the last couple of years, right? We've seen lots of games in early access, which I think is a good way for the developers to assess what is working out, what is not.
I love early access. Yeah. But you could be there too long. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say, I participate myself, and if it's games I'm passionate about, then I really do my best to participate, to report any bugs, any feedback whatsoever. I know it's important, but there's also been games that have been in early access for years, or never left early access, or left early access were immediately abandoned, right? So then I'm also thinking, like, what is the point? Like, what was this for? Like, you spent all this time assessing, evaluating, collecting feedback, then assessing, and then you release something that is still an incomplete product, and you're moving on to a next thing? Okay.
I mean, obviously the realities are we run out of money.
Yeah.
We find an audience doesn't connect. And I genuinely think that most of the time, even when an early access game is abandoned, it's incredibly difficult to say we've closed the game. And so we end up with this. And I think the real crime is we end up not communicating. I think that's one of the real crime in terms of games of this. Do you have an equivalent though I mean, I suppose the nearest thing to your equivalent in your FMCG world is when you do these short-term seasonal releases or variants of some. I mean, because in my head, some of them are intentionally, we're doing a seasonal thing because we want to create limited demand cycles. Therefore, but I imagine some of them are actually intentional. Like, if this works, then it will become a product. Am I right? Or, I mean, how does that work in your world?
Nowadays, I see it more as a one-off thing, which is designed to go viral on social media. And then it's really limited. Really is, okay, yeah, some people manage to get their hands on this exclusive product. It's never happening again. Well, there will be another one, but it will never be one-to-one. It used to be that you'd get exclusive launches that would then roll out as regular standard products. Doesn't happen that much anymore, but the world has also changed a lot. We didn't have this virality on social media. It was, like products existed in some space, people would talk about it and they would be requested, I guess. I mean, I know people who would actually pick up their phones and call the helpline of big companies saying, hey, I love this variant that you had back in the day, this ice cream flavor, blah, blah, blah. Can you please bring it back? So there's also a way to collect feedback like this. And someone listens, but it's like we had some promos recently for Heinz where it was just like for 1 or 2 days, they run them in Amsterdam and that was it. And they're not coming back. It's just not happening again.
And then, that like 3 years down the line, some YouTuber, a Jolly or someone like that, is going to be doing some sort of taste comparison of that good because someone's managed to get it on eBay and probably going to make themselves ill in the process. But that's another subject. But actually, one of the things this does remind me, though, of is particularly Kit Kat in Japan. Where it seems to me that they've made an art form of these exclusive variants. I mean, obviously, Kit Kat's a different brand, blah, blah, blah. The fact that they've taken the time, and even if I remember correctly, it's almost a regional piece in Japan as well. I mean, that's an interesting design challenge. I mean, do you see that being something that comes up in your world regularly, or is that is Japan, that only ever will be Japan?
Somehow it is such a Japanese thing. I mean, like you said, this is a concept. It's called gente. They do it per region. There's people that literally take the train, they go region by region to collect these regional specific products, items, whatever it is. It could be anything, could be collectibles, could be food. So big companies like Kraft Heinz can play into this by launching limited products in some of those countries. I mean, it is, I know they do it in other Asian countries as well. I have also seen it to an extent in China and in Thailand, but Japan is just like on a different level. It is like, they brought it to the level of collectibles in anything, in everything. We are not there yet. Like there's people that collect, I don't know, like Stanley Cups, right? Which is also wicked when you think about it, but okay. They would be like Christmas editions, Valentine's Day's editions, and they will make it a thing. But they are not one-off. They will also come back at some point. Have like all these very, very specific Japanese products that are only produced in a certain part of the country or for a certain time period. And then it could be like also Starbucks cups, right? That's the craze. It's interesting. It's just not viable, I think, for big businesses to produce these on a long term. I think that's the main problem.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to one of the sort of key FMCG things, which is the economy of scale. I think that at the end of the day, you're dealing with physical goods. The production of physical goods requires a certain level of scale to be able to deliver. Yeah. And in some ways, this is the advantage that web and games have in the digital distribution era, is that scale is not an issue at all. There is almost a near zero cost for the next copy of that particular game. So, I mean, does that how does that affect the way that you approach design challenges in general?
It makes me think of maybe you will also have an answer for this, but I'm wondering about trading cards actually, because I've
Yeah.
been playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, right?
Yeah.
And it is the exact thing with there is a physical product that is basically
Yeah.
one-to-one of this that is limited. There's a lot of value to it. There's people going crazy, storming stores, all that.
Absolutely.
Then there's just the mobile game version where I'm thinking, okay, I have all my cool, pretty cards and I'm very happy to roll them. And then I also take screenshots and send them to my friends. But at the end of the day, what is it worth really? And
Yeah.
this is the scale thing, right? Like they can make however many they want and whatever says, I don't know, like limited edition, promo, so on and so forth, might come back, might mean nothing at all. The physical products, they exist somewhere. Someone has them in like their binders at home, wherever, can sell them one day. Completely different story. I think I got very much off tangent here, but
No, this is very valid. I mean, to me, I'm hearing is the function of scarcity
yeah,
is a fundamental factor of any of these experiences. And one of the issues that a larger organization has is that you cannot play in small numbers. You can't play in scarcity when your operating base is of a global scale. It isn't functionally effective because of the cost of functional setup. I mean, I'm thinking about things like the cost of dies when you're creating labels. You have someone create a die that literally cuts out that shape to go onto that bottle. You have to have the plastic injection molding for the particular, assuming you're making the thing out plastic, or you've got to have the glass manufacturer and the molds that go. This functionally expensive items that cost huge amounts of money to get ready to be able to operate at the scale necessary to have global distribution. Running those in small numbers literally cannot be afforded. I mean, is that fair?
Yeah. That's very true. That is very
And
true.
I think this is where the digital side becomes so interesting, is because we can play with scarcity because we can drive. You could argue for scarcity, but in some ways, to me, this is one of the most interesting design challenges: is to make the gameplay, make the inherent scarcity of those assets, the cards, make sense. The effort that it takes to uncover those items, the availability, the visibility of those things being managed through play experiences is the way that we create valid scarcity rather than fake scarcity, if that makes sense.
I think social media helps a lot with this.
Yeah.
Because it is, again, you can go on stream, you can go on Instagram, you can go on TikTok, whatever. You can show off whatever you scored in a game, even if it's not a physical product. It used to be that you were a couple years old, you had your Game Boy with your Pokemon on it, and you caught something exciting like a shiny legendary, for example. And you could show it to your friends at most, or show it off in school. You do the same thing nowadays on a Twitch stream, right? And that is recorded and that just stays there. You take however many screenshots you want, you keep them, whatever you want to do with this, there's proof that this happened essentially. So it is very much, you can create it and you can drive it by incentivizing people, I think, to show it off.
And I think this is why I think it's really fascinating how I think the balance of like what design is and what good design means has become, I think, way more diverse as a direct result of the fact that our major channels of communication have shifted so dramatically since the sort of the 80s, 90s, when I was learning about marketing and originally, to now, where I think we still haven't really worked out how social media operates. It's fire in some places. Let's face it. The former, the ex social media, for want of a better phrase, and the consequences of those questions. And I'm not going to go into too much about that, but let's go back a little bit though, because I'm thinking, to get back to the bottom of trying to understand the fundamentals of what design is and what it's about, and the skills required for it, and the connection between FMCG and games and other forms of design. I mean, one of the things you highlighted, especially when we were talking around the role in Japan, is the localization and the culturalization. So I'm really interested because we often release our games as global experiences. And I'm assuming that most of the time you're, as a FMCG group, Kraft Heinz, are producing global products. But as I understand it, they're often very regional, maybe not country specific always, but often very regional approaches to some of the packaging, some of the expectations. How do you deal with keeping that kind of sense of global brand at the same time as satisfying that local need?
There's a few global brands that you will see being almost identical products in all the countries where you can buy them, which Heinz is the best example of it. And there is lots of regional, very local brands even that essentially back in the day they were all smaller companies, and they would be bought over by the FMCG giants, right?
Yeah.
So they are still recognized by consumers as that brand they used to have as kids. It's just they're now in different hands. That is really such an important part of the portfolio, of the wider portfolio, that a lot of countries, we would essentially be losing consumers entirely if we were not keeping those smaller brands alive.
Exactly.
Because they don't think about, in my home country example, they don't think about Kraft Heinz, they think about Podliszki, which is also ketchup, condiments, and sauces, but that's the brand they know, that's the brand they recognize,
No, totally. And, there's all sorts of arguments. I think in my head, I've got things like HP sauce, but it's also A1 sauce in the US. But you could argue they are very similar products. But I think the formulas are different in both territories, and you don't generally see A1 in the UK. I have seen HP in the US, interestingly. Not at the same level, but even things like the baked beans, Heinz baked beans is a British staple. It is absolutely everywhere. It's in almost every house, I'm sure. And yet I know a lot of Americans who have no idea, despite the fact that it originated as a US product, as I understand it. So I find the whole idea of localization being incredibly critical. Like you say, the classic example of where this has still left a legacy for me is in the Mars product, the Snickers, because Snickers will always be Marathon in the UK. There's a lot of people who still object to calling it, even people who probably weren't even born when it was Marathon, are still aware, at the very least, that Snickers is not what the Brits called it. And I think that kind of cultural sensitivity, massively, massively important. And
but does it taste the same?
They're exactly the same.
Yeah.
They're exactly the same. And although I think there's an interesting one with Mars in particular, where a Mars bar in the US is essentially a Milky Way, and a Milky Way in the UK is essentially a Mars bar. So there's some weird ones like that.
Yeah.
They're not quite the same because their ingredient requirements in the US are different from the ingredient requirements in the UK.
So
there are some taste differences.
Different,
I spent a lot of time working in software for the food industry back in my when I first started out. So I visited most of the chocolate companies in the UK and quite a lot of them in Europe as well. So I spent a lot of time in Slough walking through the Mars factory. So I have an inordinate knowledge, ridiculous knowledge about confectionery in the UK. Anyway, enough of that. So back to this design principle. So let's talk about the process. What are practical things that you do? So, given that you've worked in UX, you've worked in physical goods, and also I'm thinking about things like branding and logo design. There's some fundamental principles about communication that's at the heart of this, as much as there is the physical problem solving. How do you ensure that the communication side, so the flavors, the identity, the value proposition, how are they communicated through the physicality, but also the styling of the assets that you produce?
Yeah, so this is where research is key. I think what's fundamental is understanding who you're going to sell it to. So say understanding that your Gen Z audience will be different from your millennial audience, honestly. Yeah. I don't know if you maybe saw, but I just caught it somewhere the other day where Mountain Dew revealed a new logo last year. I missed it somehow.
Oh, yeah.
But essentially, I thought, okay, this is quite interesting because they are going way back to, I don't remember if it was 60s or earlier, but essentially it is the same design, just slightly, a teeny tiny bit reworked. So it's like they stepped away from the gamer aesthetics they had going on. They went back to something that is probably nostalgic. But then,
Oh,
like, one of the
interesting.
arguments was I was on Reddit, I was following a discussion. One of the arguments against it was, okay, what's with the outdoorsy vibe for this? Like, Mountain Dew is just a carbonated drink that's not healthy for anyone, but like we're seeing pines and mountains, and it's like it's all cute and nice, and this is not like the kind of drink I would have when I go hiking. So then I'm thinking there was something going on, but like who is this now marketed towards, right?
Yeah, totally get it. Totally get it.
Like
I think that's
some
a pivotal example of where a design is misplaced into the audience's perspective. They must have tested this. I mean, I think you're right. They're definitely seeming to. I've just pulled it up online, and it's like I definitely see the difference between the kind of more electric shock kind of feel of the previous logo, which definitely seemed to spell energy in its visual punch. I encourage people to go look it up. Versus the older sort of imagery, which clearly in the sort of the 40s, well, 60s probably is closer to the logo we now have. But you can see how there's that, like you say, that retro-esque, but they're not literally making it look retro, but they are definitely harkening back emotionally.
Yeah.
So I think there's something really interesting about that. I think it's interesting that they framed it in a similar way, arguably, to the most recent version. But they've taken the edge off, they've taken the energy off, they've taken the momentum off.
Yeah. So it really makes you think. Someone wanted to go back and just stir up this feeling of nostalgia again.
Yeah.
But if they kept selling this, if they were selling this to gamers, is that still going to resonate with gamers? It might resonate with, like, I don't know, maybe slightly older people, or with someone who values good visual design, or someone who thinks, oh, this is like the aesthetics I actually am digging. But otherwise, it's not. How I'm thinking, like, how are you going to like include this logo and say esports transmissions, where you have this as a sponsor, and it's just like, yay, sunny hiking time, Mountain Dew.
Well, it's interesting. I'm just seeing a picture of the logo on a can, and it still does seem to have an element of energy to it. So I think that, because one of the things I would think of with my design head on, right? Not that I'm an art designer in any way, shape, or form. Like I'm incapable of art design. Just give me game mechanics. That's my bad. I definitely would see it alongside a Monster or a Lucozade Energy, or one of those kind of, like even maybe not Red Bull, but that kind of energy aspiring brand. I would definitely look at it and go, yes, it's in that family. I would expect it to be ridiculous quantities of sugar. But if you think about a lot of that prior brand, I'd argue implied there's probably going to be a lot of caffeine in there as well, and I don't think that's a factor in Mountain Dew. So I wonder I think it does make sense to me that they moved away from how far, because I suspect, looking at this history of the Mountain Dew logo, I suspect the mistake was prior. And the mistake was, I think a tendency a lot of us get into is that, we'll just make one change. And what we find ourselves is we keep iterating on a particular change and finding ourselves getting ourselves into hot water because we didn't notice the direction of movement.
Yeah, that happens all the time in all industries you can think about. Lots of companies think they can solve fundamental problems when, for example, they're just not selling, by redesigning their whole brand without any sort of research, any sort of like groundwork, any foundation, where they don't actually know what they stand for. So it's just going to be, hey, let's look at trends. Let's look at what the other companies are doing. Let's look at Pinterest and let's just copy that. This really comes to, say, a corporate identity, a logo design, brand design. This is where you see it the most. Although it also happens with, say, Apple made, sorry to use this super overused example, but the sleek phone design is something that every other phone maker copied.
Yeah.
It is now the standard.
Yeah. Totally.
So it is like, you can argue that there's hardly anything that is created these days, and it's mostly just things that are being copied and recreated, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in the particular case of the Apple, I mean, so I have a history in mobile devices. I worked at NVIDIA at the point where they were devising a thing called Tegra chip, which was the first system on chip. And that was the era where we transitioned from the feature phone to the smartphone. And so, I saw the transition between devices like Motorola's, which is a device on 3G that was like a reasonable-ish smartphone device, which had joystick-style controllers on it, which meant that you could actually move around a screen in a similar way that you could with a mouse. And you could also touch. And then Apple got rid of that, so it was only touch, and there were no other buttons. And actually, I think that was the right thing to do. But you could see how there was a difficulty in the transition from, say, a BlackBerry, which is all around the key, to the touch screen. And now the touchscreen has become so ubiquitous. The limitations of the touchscreen, things like not having any haptic feedback, physical, no pressed button. And boy, were there some amazingly weird experiments on finding ways to feel like you could press a screen. But yeah, seeing that transition was huge. And I think, the point in some ways is that whilst I think Apple made decisions I wouldn't have done, they got rid of certain things I wouldn't have done. What they understood was, let's simplify the experience onto a screen. And then everything is happening on the screen. We don't have to think outside of the screen.
Yeah.
And that did work. That function did function well. And then because they sold well, even if there were alternatives, no one was willing to take the risk.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fundamental question. Oh, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think am I on something there?
I think that we're not thinking about accessibility here, honestly. Yeah. So I just wanted to say most research is done on a general population, as general as you can go, because you're trying to sell to as many people as possible. So I think, honestly, good design takes into consideration the needs of completely different groups of people, because if you design for those with different needs, from, say, able-bodied persons, everyone benefits, because we have, I don't know what you call them, but say if you have a sidewalk, like a pavement, and then there is the low part where you can go with like a carriage, right? This will also be useful to someone who can't walk that fast, someone who's elderly, to someone who's in a wheelchair.
Yeah, totally.
Everyone benefits from this, right? While if you design for all of us have the same bodies, all of us have the exact same experiences, we are excluding a group. So even like when you were talking about the phone, I thought, okay, yeah, then there's an issue with someone maybe has big fingers. It's a stupid example, but I know, like, I saw this discussion with like the Nintendo Switch where people were saying, oh yeah, but I can't play on this console comfortably because it's so teeny tiny. And then you have the touch screen on everything, where sometimes it's also like, I have quite a large phone, honestly, so it's fine.
Yeah.
But it's just not going to work to some people. So who are we really thinking of when we're designing this stuff? Like, again, I feel in many cases it's the designer making a decision, which is, I am not the end user, but actually I am so closely involved in this process that I might as well be, because it's also something I would like to use because it's a good product. And then they're making this whole experience, maybe consciously, usually unconsciously, just in line with what they themselves want to launch at the end of the day. Or use at the end of the day.
I think and there's a sort of blindness to it. And I think what I was hinting at was that often it's a risk factor rather than a deliberate act. And people don't get promoted for having a successful idea, but they do get fired if they deviate from the idea and it doesn't work. So, I mean, but I think you hit on a really important point, I think, there, so I'm an ambassador for Special Effect. That's a charity that focuses on providing kind of the facilities, gameplay mechanics, the tools, controllers for people who are physically kind of limited in some way, so they can play on a level playing field. I mean, there's amazing charity, hugely supportive with what they do. It's incredible. But what they highlight to me is that these problems are solvable. In fact, actually, the more we have invested in understanding how to solve those problems, for example, eye tracking has improved dramatically as a direct consequence, and the works that those guys have done has contributed to the underlying basis of how that functions. So at one level, it means that somebody who could not have played a game at all can now. Yeah. But also, people who can function normally can still get the benefit of that function to do shortcut things. So, like you say, everyone benefits. And I think we also show so many times where little things like not understanding the physical limitations of people can lead to disaster. And I'm thinking about things like making sure that people can actually comfortably pick up a bottle.
Yeah.
If you've got arthritis, to me, that is part of the design challenge
Yeah. Very
for a
much so.
bottle of ketchup or something like that. And so to me, this whole idea of understanding the broader community, massively, massively important. And we're not always good at it. One of the issues I think we can deal with most readily is things like colorblindness.
Mm-hmm.
But even things down like I've got family members who are dyslexic.
Yeah.
The ability in a game UX, in a website UX, to be able to change font, to be able to change color backgrounds, can massively impact the comfort of that particular player if they have that particular. I hate using the word restriction. It's difference. Let's just call it a
Difference. Yeah.
difference.
It decides playability and to
Mm.
many, honestly.
I mean, that's an interesting one for me as well, which is when you're looking at brands, color schemes, fonts, how much are you thinking about that kind of like physical or like
Mm.
personal differences that affect usability, if you like?
So what I've learned to do is when we moved more into the digital space and e-commerce, there was a lot of emphasis placed on well-made pack shots and all sorts of like 3D renders of products and hero images, right? So what I learned was that you can use a very simple tool, first of all, to check contrast. Second of all, to imitate how an image would be viewed at a certain like arm's length. And the idea was this is for accessibility, but this is also for someone who is, say, on their way back home on public transportation, looking at their phone at a certain distance, like, far away, will they see the product or not? Because this decides, like that first moment, do they see the product, what they're actually buying? Do they understand what it is? It decides if they take this brand over the other brand. So this was the simplest thing you could start with. It's just 2 extra steps that should always be involved that are still not done widely. It could be the same way applied to any sort of reworks when it comes to how the packaging is going to look on shelf, how the packaging is going to look in any sort of area. When it comes to, say, doing samples or proofs in like a technical setup, in the right technical setup, you'd have like different types of light also to, say, imitate the environment of a store to see if it's legible, essentially. Usually it is thought of as, is this still going to be pretty or not? But honestly, this should be evaluated through the lens of, is this legible?
Yeah,
there is some standards that have to be that you have to adhere by, which is, say, the minimum font size, and that is required by the European Union, where anything below that value will not be legible, so it can't be printed in that form. And that is actually thinking about people that might not be able to read it, might get food poisoning, right? Something serious might happen.
Absolutely.
So this is all, and then everyone benefits because it's not, okay, maybe there's less space and we have to think more about how we're going to use that space, how we're going to plan out that space on packaging, because it's always also restricted since a lot of things just go downscale. But it is going to be easier to everyone if it's just a slightly bigger font, honestly. You're straining your eyes less.
As you say, this is something that can have a profound, actual real-world impact. I mean, if somebody has an obscure allergy and can't read that item has that thing in it, that's actually going to cause a massive problem. And I mean, thank goodness in many ways, games doesn't have that consequence. That doesn't mean we shouldn't hit. I mean, there's a couple of folks who, Alicia from Next Games, who happens to have a history as she's on the blind scale and was an animator. Which I find fascinating. She now works at Next Games doing a whole bunch of other things, but she's always been an amazing advocate talking to people about the importance of this. But also a guy called Ian Hamilton, who does some amazing work in terms of helping particularly game teams understand accessibility issues on a wide scale. So we have, as an industry, a bunch of, talented people who help game teams think about this stuff, but it is so easy for us to miss this. And I know I've been guilty of it, where the rush to get the product out means that we don't pay the due attention that it deserved, and so we miss out that some color scheme that we picked meant that it wasn't going to end up being legible enough, or the font choice meant that it was going to be harder to read from somebody who had a dyslexic kind of condition. So I'm totally with you. I think it's incredibly important to get this stuff right. But what this sums up to me is there are massive differences in terms of the kind of day-to-day work that you do in the functional design of a packaging item. The way that color schemes and logos and art works probably has more across UX, across
Yeah.
games, in terms of like how imagery communicates ideas. But obviously in game design, the flow and the function, the actions of the player are distinct and very different beasts. But I think at the end of the day, the heart of it is, as we go back to the very first thing you talked about, we're creating things that have a purpose
Yeah.
that has to fulfill that purpose. So with that in mind, what's sort of one thing you'd like somebody to take away from this conversation? If somebody was a designer, whether they were designing, fast-moving consumer goods, sites, whatever it might be, what are the fundamental principles of design you want them to take away from?
Honestly, I would like everyone to remember that the more risks they consider, the more unexpected things and different sides, different phases to a project they consider early on, the higher the chances are that they will actually launch something successful and something usable. Honestly, years of experience seeing this not being done, this is a big wish for myself, for anyone that I work with. And if it comes to game design, if it comes to anything like in consumer goods world, really, the earlier you think about what could potentially go wrong, or even like at an early stage, you don't even know what shape it's going to take. But if you start thinking about like the different parts of the supply chain and the different things that will have to, the different people that have to be involved, really, the easier it will be later on. So it's really a lot of work up front. But if you don't invest, if you don't do that work up front, you end up with so many bottlenecks along the way and so many unsuccessful launches, honestly, and no learnings taken, essentially. Just things being done, being made, existing in some space. Then you move on to another thing, and you keep just failing. But like maybe just take that step back, think about what can be done in a sustainable manner as well. And then I'm pretty sure it's going to be easier, honestly. Then the process is going to be easier.
And I love that. And I think it very much resonates with game designers, particularly a friend of mine, Ty Kelly, who talked about the role of the designer to be to reduce costs. What he meant was exactly what you're saying is, if we take the risks as a thought experiment, if we solve the problems as a thought experiment, then by the time we produce it and iterate it, we're already removing most of the risk.
Yeah.
And if there's nothing else to define what design is, that may well be the closest we can get. Well, okay, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much for that. If people want to find out more about what you do, what's the best way for them to be able to reach out to you?
My LinkedIn, because I have all my links there and I'm quite active. So
LinkedIn is the most common on this particular podcast, so thank you very much for that. I definitely recommend reaching out. And Monika, that's been fantastic. So if you've enjoyed this, if you thought it was interesting, hopefully you've got something about the connection between anything that we produce and design and connect with a real world interaction in mind, the designer is at the heart of that process. The designer is there to try and solve the questions before you as the consumer encounter them. And there are different challenges in different disciplines across every space. So please, let's carry on having a conversation about this. If you please like, subscribe, share, all the other stuff. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to Monika one more time and say goodbye, and tune in next time when we'll carry on the conversation about game design and economies.
Thank you very much.